There are moments in life when silence is no longer an option. For years, I chose the quiet path, not out of fear, but reverence. I lived behind stone walls, far removed from the noise of public life, dedicating my days to prayer, reflection, and the pursuit of divine intimacy. But now, after years of quiet service and contemplation, I feel compelled to speak, not to share doctrine or debate theology, but to offer something more vulnerable. My testimony, a story of friendship, of burden, and of a sacred message carried by a man the world knew as Pope Francis, but I knew simply as Jorge. What follows is not a eulogy. It's a call, a witness, a reminder, and perhaps, for some, a wake-up call. I invite you to listen with your heart, because what I'm about to share could change everything. When I first met Jorge, he wasn't yet Pope Francis. He wasn't standing on balconies or dressed in white robes. He was a simple man, walking the worn streets of Buenos Aires with a worn-out Bible and a fire in his eyes. I was just a cloistered sister then, devoted to prayer and tucked away from the world's chaos. We met through a mutual friend who thought we might understand each other. And from the very first moment, I saw something in him I hadn't seen in many clergy. Presence. Not the kind that demands a room's attention, but the kind that listens, truly listens. He didn't ask questions or lead with words. He led with silence. And it was in that silence that a rare connection began to form. What struck me about Jorge was how he carried his vocation, not as a ladder to climb, but as a cross to bear. Most people chase influence. He chased intimacy, with God, with truth, and with suffering. When he listened to me speak of prayer, of the ache of intercession, he didn't flinch. He nodded, not in pity, but in recognition. It was clear. He had been there. He once told me, "The holiest things in life are never loud." That line stayed with me for years. It summed him up perfectly. He wasn't theatrical, he wasn't polished, but he was holy. And in a world obsessed with spectacle, that made him quietly revolutionary. Over time, our correspondence grew. He would write me letters, not as an archbishop or pope, but as a brother in Christ. He called me Hermana. I called him Hermano. There was no hierarchy in those pages, only hunger. For God, for truth, for purity, in a world clouded with distraction. His words were full of longing, sometimes full of weariness, but always full of hope. He had this way of speaking about the church, not as an institution, but as a beloved. He was deeply in love with her, and deeply heartbroken by how far she had wandered. I remember once he wrote, "The church is building taller towers, but her prayer rooms are gathering dust." That was the kind of burden he carried, not the kind that breaks a man in public, but the kind that weeps in private. And it was that burden that slowly drew us closer. He would confide things to me that I never asked for, not secrets, but sorrows. He feared a generation growing up in noise, raised on distraction and starving spiritually, and he didn't judge them. He grieved for them. "We are entertaining souls to death," he said once. "We've learned how to preach, but forgotten how to pray." That broke something in me, because I knew it was true, and I knew he carried that grief like a second skin. Still, Jorge never became cynical. That's important to say. Even under the weight of misunderstanding, criticism, and exhaustion, he never let bitterness grow roots in his soul. He still believed in the church, fiercely, but not in her image, in her possibility. He would say, "She is still the bride, but she must remember her first love," and I could see how it tore at him when she didn't. I once saw him pray in a chapel face down, whispering not for revival, but for repentance. It was raw. It was real. It was the kind of prayer that shakes walls. In every letter, every whispered prayer, Jorge was pointing to one thing: Jesus. Not a version of him, not the institutionalized image, but the real Jesus, the one who bleeds, who weeps, who forgives, who calls. "If I die," he told me once, "don't let them remember my name. Let them remember his." That's the kind of man he was, uninterested in legacy, consumed by purpose. And in that purpose, he found fire. Not the fire of fame, but the fire of the Spirit, the kind that cannot be extinguished, even by death. I didn't always understand why he shared these things with me. I was just a nun, hidden in the shadows. But now, I know. He saw something in me, a mirror of the silence he valued, a witness to the things he couldn't say aloud. And so he asked me, in his final days, to speak, not as a scholar, not as a public figure, but as a friend, as someone who knew his heartbeat, as someone who would not let the fire die when he passed through that final doorway. And that's why I'm here, not for recognition, not for comfort, but for obedience, because some messages are too sacred to be buried with the messenger. I remember the night he became Pope. The world watched with curiosity and cameras, but I watched with tears. Not because I feared he would forget us, those of us who had known him in the silence. I knew he wouldn't. I cried because I knew what the office would demand of him. People see the robes, the smiles, the moments on balconies. They do not see the lonely prayers in the dark. They do not see the weight of shepherding a distracted flock, the agony of interceding for a world asleep to the eternal. He knew the cost, and still he said yes. He never sought the throne. He only wanted to hold the door open a little longer. After that, our letters became more sparse, not because love had faded, but because time had shortened. He told me once that when death draws near, words become sharper, not frantic, just focused. Each one counted. In those final letters I heard a shift, a clarity that only comes when a soul stands near eternity's edge. He called death the doorway. Nothing dramatic, just a simple truth. When I leave before you, he wrote, tell them. He didn't explain who. He didn't need to. His eyes had always been fixed not on the crowd, but on the one. And now I find myself carrying those final instructions. They weren't suggestions. They were convictions. And they weren't meant to be polished into philosophy or cloaked in theological debate. They were cries from the heart of a man who burned with love for Christ and wept over the apathy of his people. Speak not with argument, but with witness, he told me. So here I am, not as a teacher or critic, but as someone who sat in the quiet with a soul that heard Jesus louder than most. I do not speak of abstractions. I speak of sweat and tears and whispered prayers that shook rooms more than sermons ever could. Jorge believed the church was not in danger from her enemies, but from her forgetfulness. He feared not rebellion, but lukewarmness, a church full of activity, but starving for intimacy. People who built ministries around God but rarely met with him. He would sit with Revelation's words for hours. You are neither hot nor cold. That passage broke him more than any headline ever could. Lukewarmness, he once said, is the quiet death of devotion. No scandal, no flame, just a slow drifting away while everything on the surface looks fine. He didn't despise tradition. He honored it deeply, but he feared when tradition became a substitute for truth. He didn't despise innovation. He welcomed it cautiously, but he feared when innovation became noise that drowned out the Spirit's whisper. His call was always the same. Return. Return to the scriptures. Return to your knees. Return to the fire. These weren't poetic words. They were prophetic alarms. They were the final heartbeat of a man who had seen the world and still believed in the possibility of revival. What he feared most wasn't persecution. It was performance. He saw how we had perfected appearances, learned the right phrases, structured our churches like corporations, and curated our worship like concerts. But somewhere in all the choreography, we had lost the ache, the hunger, the trembling. We preach him, Jorge once said, but we do not know him. Those words struck me like lightning, because I knew he wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. This wasn't a rebuke. It was a cry for the bride to wake up and remember her groom. The last time I saw him, there was no crowd, no ceremony, just two old friends and the stillness of impending eternity. He looked tired, yes, but in his eyes I saw something fierce, a holy clarity. He gripped my hand and said it again, but slower this time. Return to the Gospels. Return to your knees. Return to the fire. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to. That was the message. Not a statement, not a slogan, a summons. He believed the future of the church wouldn't be built on platforms, but on broken hearts, on people who remembered how to burn for the one who first burned for them. He never wanted fame. That's what most people misunderstand. They think ascending to the papacy meant he had ambition for authority. But the truth is far from that. He used to joke, if Peter had a press team, we would have never heard the truth. He missed being unknown. He missed walking through markets anonymously, praying in chapels without cameras, crying without the burden of public interpretation. But he never resented the call. He saw it as a divine assignment, not a personal promotion. He said yes to the wait, not because he wanted to lead the world, but because he wanted to serve the cross. I remember a letter where he wrote, "I did not ask for the keys, only promised to keep the door open until he returned." That's how he saw his role. A doorkeeper, not a king. Even as the world crowned him with admiration and controversy, he kept his spirit low. He fought every day to stay small. That was his holiness, not in grandeur, but in grounding. He once said, "Holiness is not found in spotlights. It's found in the shadows where obedience lives." He was not seeking applause. He was longing for presence. And that presence was not found in platforms, but in private moments with God. What moved him most wasn't doctrine. It wasn't policies or theological victories. It was hunger. Hunger for God. Hunger for intimacy. He feared the church had forgotten how to be hungry. He would say, "When you are full of yourself, there is no room for him." He saw how quickly pride could dress itself in religious language, how subtly arrogance could hide in tradition or progress. His heart ached for the simplicity of need. That was his gospel. A gospel of humility. A gospel of daily returning. A gospel of falling on your face not because you failed, but because you needed him more than your next breath. He once told me that the most dangerous moment in a believer's life is not when they fall into sin, but when they stop feeling their need for grace. Even popes get thirsty, he said. And he meant it. He rose every morning before the sun, before the gates opened, before anyone needed anything from him. He sat with the Word, journaled his thoughts, and waited. He said it was in those moments he felt like a child again, barefoot before the Father, waiting for bread. That image marked me, because it reminded me that spiritual authority means nothing without spiritual hunger. There were moments he would weep for hours, not because of politics, not because of criticism, but because of how far we had drifted from the cross. He told me once, "We are building ministries that do not require God." That line shattered me, because I saw it too. Sermons written without prayer, worship designed to impress, churches full of cleverness but void of power. And all the while the altar grew cold. He didn't say this to condemn. He said it to awaken. "Return to the altar," he begged. "Let it burn again." In our final conversation, his voice was weak, but his eyes were bright. "Tell them," he whispered. "Tell them it's real. Heaven, judgment, mercy, Jesus." He looked at me with tears and said, "The hour is very late." That urgency lives in me now, because I know he wasn't giving me a message. He was giving me a torch, and I can't bury it. I can't keep it quiet. Not when souls are starving for the real thing. Not when churches are trading oil for aesthetics. Not when eternity is closer than we dare admit. I must speak, because silence now would be betrayal. So this is my call to you. Not to impress you, not to educate you, but to plead with you. Come back. Come back to the one who never stopped waiting for you. If you've drifted, return. If you've gone cold, come close. If you've built a life around religion but left Christ outside, tear it down and begin again. Let the gospel shake you. Let your knees find the floor. Let the Spirit burn through every polished surface you've built. Because this isn't a warning, it's an invitation. And like Jorge said, it's not too late, but the hour is very late. I've shared this not to stir controversy, not to promote a brand, not to build a platform. I've spoken because I made a promise. And more than that, because I believe someone watching this needs to hear it. Maybe you've felt the ache too. That quiet suspicion that there must be more than what modern religion has offered you. Maybe your faith has grown mechanical. Maybe your fire has gone cold. You're not alone. I've felt it too. Jorge felt it too. And yet he believed, until his final breath, that it was not too late to return. Return to the Gospels. Let them read you before you read them. Return to your knees. Let your pride be broken, and your prayers be reborn. Return to the fire. Not the emotional high of a moment, but the Spirit who consumes and refines and revives. This is not about adding more knowledge. This is about surrendering to the one who already knows you fully and still calls you by name. You are not too far gone. You are not too broken. The invitation is still open. If this message reached your heart, not just your ears, then respond. Don't just listen. Move. Decide. Let this be the moment you stop waiting to feel ready and start walking back toward the only one who satisfies. Subscribe to this channel, not just to follow me, but to follow the message. Share it with someone who's forgotten the sound of God's voice. Leave a comment if you're choosing today to return. Speak it out. Let your confession become your starting line. Follow Jesus, not just as a concept, not just on Sundays, but every single day, in the quiet places, in the hard moments, in the ordinary rooms where nobody's watching but heaven. Let him interrupt your routine. Let him transform your rituals. Let him reintroduce himself to your tired soul. If Jorge taught me anything, it's that we cannot afford to settle for polite religion when eternity is pressing against our walls. The King is near, and he's calling. And if you're still unsure, still wrestling, still wandering, I want you to know something. You're seen, you're loved, and there is space for you at the table of grace, not because you earned it, not because you proved yourself, but because the cross was enough. Don't waste another day pretending. Come as you are. Fall on your face. Open your hands. He is still worth everything. Stay connected here. I'll be sharing more, not for fame, not for fanfare, but because voices like Jorge's cannot be silenced, and neither should yours. If God is stirring something in you, nurture it, feed it, fan the flame. We're in this together, not as followers of content, but as followers of Christ. This space is not a stage. It's an altar, and you're welcome here. Until next time, remember this. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. And the voice that called Jorge home is still calling you. So walk toward it, with trembling knees, with open hands, with a heart ready to burn again. I'll be here waiting in the silence with you. Speak soon, stay close, and above all, then stay hungry for him.